Hi, I've made a little video to teach you, if you don't already know how, to make basic sourdough bread. The video lasts just under half an hour, but there's quite a lot of my waffle in it, and the process itself, the process takes at least 24 hours, but the labour involved is only about 15 minutes. So it's something that you can easily do if you're working from home. It'll only take you away from your desk for no more than 5 minutes at a time. And it's probably no different from somebody having a cigarette break who smokes. Anyway, I hope you like it, but if you've got any questions, just ping me a message and I'll try and help you. Right, so I thought I'd share a bit of knowledge with you on how to make sourdough bread. Once you've tried it a few times, it's really quite easy, and you can fit it around your usual day. It really helps being home, and while we're stuck at home, you should find it pretty easy to make. There are only 2 ingredients in sourdough bread, well 3 strictly. There's flour, water and a little bit of salt. There's no yeast. The yeasts are all natural yeasts, which are captured by the sourdough starter, which is a living organism, which I usually keep in the fridge. This morning I got it out and I fed it, really to create more of it, so that I could give some away to people who wanted some. I don't know if you can see, it's nice and bubbly, which shows that it's active and it's ready to use to make some bread. If you've made your starter and left it for a week in the fridge, it separates a bit and you get water on top. You just mix it together, and even though it might not be very active, it's still fine to use to make your leaven, which is the first stage of making the bread. So yeah, this is flour and water. You feed it about once a week, and I keep it in the fridge from week to week. The way you do that is you get rid of about 2/3 of your starter, and then you top it up with equal amounts of flour and water. Usually I leave about a tablespoon in the bottom of the pot, and then add 30 grams of flour and 30 grams of water, give it a bit of a stir, put it back in the fridge, and then I can use it. I leave it for a week until I want to make more bread. Because we're at home at the moment, I'll probably be making bread a bit more frequently, so I'll probably keep it in the fridge for 2 or 3 days and bake every 2 or 3 days. So to make the leaven, the first bit, you get a nice bowl. I recommend using a glass bowl because then you can see what's happening inside the leaven as it develops. You put 30 grams of starter, and this is to make a 500 gram roughly loaf. So 30 grams of starter into the bowl. I've got too much there. If you're 1 or 2 grams over or under, it's not critical. And then you add to that 75 grams of flour and 75 grams of water. So, and it's best to use sort of lukewarm water to get the leaven going as quickly as possible. Sort of body temperature is ideal, but again, it's not too critical. So that's 75 grams of water, and then I'll put in there 75 grams of flour. Mix it together until it's roughly mixed. And then what you do is you put a tea towel over it. I'll just go and get a tea towel. A clean tea towel, I should add. Put it over it, and then you leave it for a few hours until until the starter's really got going, and you can see that there's air bubbles in it. You'll see sort of bubbles on the top, and you'll also see bubbles through the side of the bowl. So I will leave you there. Right, so I've got the leaven here. I spoke to you last at 11:30. It's now 4 o'clock. I checked this at about 2 o'clock and it was pretty much ready to go, but I had a conference call, so I just put it back and left it, and it's now 4 o'clock, and if you can see, there's bubbles in the mixture, which means it's pretty much ready to go. So back to my scales. I've got a big bowl, and what we're going to do is we're going to make the final dough now. So I use 275 grams, which is the same as 275 mils, again of lukewarm water. You can use cold water, but it being slightly warm just kick-starts it. So 275, again, if you're a couple of grams over or under, it's not massively critical. So I put the water in the bowl first, and the reason I do that is because one way of testing your starter and whether it's ready or not is when you put it in the water, it should float. So I'm going to add 150 grams of starter, or sorry, of leaven. And I don't know if you can see that, but it's floating in the water pretty much, which means that it's nice and aerated. The yeast is active and it's ready to use. And that's 150 grams. Exactly. And there's a little tiny bit left that you can use to either create a new starter or give to someone else to use. Right, and I just mix that in with the water. So just roughly, so it's fairly evenly combined. And I'm just going to take off my watch because it's going to get mucky. And then we add the flour, and we're going to use 425 grams of flour. This time I'm using plain flour, but once you've had some success with plain flour, it's slightly easier to manage. Ooh, I've slipped. You can be creative and use mixtures of wholemeal and plain, or granary flours, or spelt or rye or whatever. Okay, that's 425 grams of flour. And now what I do is I'm just using my hand and sort of bringing it all together into a dough. Okay, that's it. Looks like that. And now I'm going to let it rest for about 20 minutes for the gluten to start working before I add the salt. So I'm going to pop the tea towel back over and leave it and go and wash my hands. Okay, so the dough's been resting now for 20 minutes. And I'm going to put it back on the scales and add between 7 and 10 grams of salt. Okay, and now I'm going to wet my hands. Get them nice and wet. And now I'm going to use a sort of claw action to incorporate the salt into the dough. So I'm just squeezing it between my hands. Until it's all incorporated. Now the dough already feels a bit more like a ball than it did previously, and it's come together. I don't know, it doesn't look that different yet, but it feels different. Anyway, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cover it again and leave it for half an hour. I'm going to go and put it in the airing cupboard because despite me working from home, my husband is Scottish and our heating is only set up to come on in the mornings and the evenings. So the temperature in here is probably around 19, 20 degrees. And in the airing cupboard it's between 25 and 26, which is ideal for proving bread. So I'm going to put it in the airing cupboard for half an hour, and then I will come back to it and I'll see you later. Right, so the dough has been sitting in the airing cupboard for half an hour, and I'm ready to put the first fold into the dough. I'm gonna go and wet my hands. When you're making sourdough, it's better to wet your hands rather than to flour them to stop the dough sticking to them, because you don't want to incorporate any extra flour or minimal extra flour anyway, because this can affect the texture of the bread and make it heavier. So the method I'm going to show you to make your sourdough involves a minimum of 4 folds at between half-hourly, 45-minute intervals. This is the first one. We've got to be gentle, unlike sort of conventional bread with a manufactured yeast where you might try and sort of knead the dough for quite a long time and bash the air out of it. We're going to handle the dough as lightly as possible, and we're folding into it. So the first fold, I sort of pick up the sort of rear 50% of the dough between my hands, and I pull it up and stretch it and then double it back on itself. I turn the bowl round 90 degrees and do it again. And another 90 degrees, do it again, and finally, final 90 degrees. You probably noticed that the first time I lifted the dough up to stretch it and double it over, there was quite a lot of stretch in it, and by the time I got to the fourth sort of stretch and double over, the elasticity of the dough was less, only sort of dropped a few inches. That's normal, and that's a good sign. And yeah, I'll put this back in the airing cupboard now for another half an hour before I do it again. I'm not going to video every fold because it's just an exact repetition of what I've just done. So I'll do this process 3 more times. After the fourth fold, I'll give it another half an hour or so in the airing cupboard, and then I'll come back to the video and show you how to shape your dough. Okay, so I've put 4 folds in this bread now, and in this dough, and it's been about 2 hours since I spoke to you last. That's because I had to go and pick Angus up from nursery, so I couldn't do the folds bang on half an hour, more like 45 minutes. That's absolutely fine. Anyway, we're going to shape the dough now. This is the next stage. So I'm really, really lightly flouring the workbench, and then I'm going to tip the dough out onto the bench. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the edge and pull the dough out and then bring it into the middle. Out into the middle in a sort of a star shape, going around the outside. Okay, so I've gone all the way around the middle, and now what I'm going to do is just flip it over and sort of use my scraper. You can use a spatula, like something like this would work if you don't have, oh whoops, that's a bit sticky actually. You probably need to flour it. Stick it in some flour. And yeah, if you haven't got a plastic scraper, you just got to, or even just flour your hands slightly and just sort of tuck it under. This little bit of the process is actually quite important because it creates tension in the outside of your bread, and this will be the top. So yeah, there's a bit, that's quite important, just to sort of increase the tension, make it a nice sort of neat ball shape. Anyway, now we've done that, we'll just let this sit here for about 20 minutes just to settle. Right, so this has been sitting here for 20 minutes, and now we're in the second stage of shaping the dough. So I'm going to flip it over onto a little bit of surface I've just dusted with flour, and then do exactly the same as what we did last time. Bring sort of the edges into the middle, lightly press down so you create a neat ball, and then we are in a position to, well actually I'm going to turn that back over and just give it a bit more tension. Right, so this is ready now to prove, and normally I would use a proving basket like this, which is heavily floured inside, but I appreciate if you're new to sourdough making, you probably don't have one of these. So you can substitute it with a bowl. This is just a salad bowl. It's about the right size, and a tea towel. So I'm going to really douse the tea towel in flour. I'm going to stop the dough from sticking to it. So I'm going to, yeah, try and impregnate the tea towel with as much flour, maybe it's easier to do on the side, as I can. And this will make it easier when you come to turn it out into the pan for baking. Right, so that's a pretty floury tea towel. I'm going to put that in the bowl, and then I'm going to put a bit more flour on the outside of this, and then I'm going to turn it upside down and put it in the bowl. And the reason you need to keep it upside down is that this bowl is creating the shape, and when we turn it out onto the pan for baking, we'll sort of upend it and plop it out. So what's facing upwards is actually the base of the bread. So anyway, we can sprinkle that with the leftover flour, which has been on the workbench, and tea towels back, cover it with a tea towel again. Now it's sort of almost 9 o'clock now, so I'm not going to bake it tonight because this will need several hours to rise, even if I was to put it in the airing cupboard. Sourdough is much slower to rise than bread made with sort of modern manufactured yeast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the fridge overnight, so it will prove slower, and then bake it tomorrow. If I had made the leaven last night and started on the dough this morning, I could have finished preparing the dough, got to this stage by lunchtime, and I could have baked it in the evening if I'd left it at room temperature. But yeah, I can slow it down by putting it in the fridge. I could put it in the fridge now and probably not bake it until the day after tomorrow, because there's a little bit of leeway when you have to bake it. You don't want to overprove it, but I know from past experience that I can get away with putting it in the fridge for sort of 30 hours or so before it overproves. So I'll put this in the fridge and I will see you tomorrow. Okay, morning. So I've taken the bread out of it's a bit, you get a bit of a glare there. Don't know if you can see very well in that. Out of the fridge, and how do I get this so that you can see? It's nicely risen. And I've got the oven, it's been on about 20 minutes, half an hour. It's at 250 degrees, so it's really hot. And in there I've got a cast iron Le Creuset pan. You don't need to use Le Creuset, any cast iron pan. And if you don't have a cast iron casserole, you can just use a normal baking sheet. The reason to use a cast iron pan is because with the lid on, it keeps the humidity in, and you don't have to worry about sort of spraying the inside of the oven with water. If you want to just use a baking sheet and turn the bread onto that, you need to throw probably about a cupful of water in the back of the oven and then close the door to create some steam in there. Anyway, I do it the easy way with the cast iron pan. It's going to be hot, so I'm getting a wooden board out. Right, I'm going to get it out the oven. Yeah. Whoops, that's a bit of, there's actually a bit of flour in there from last time, so I'll just take that out. Right, so being very careful with this because it's hot, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly tip the bread into the pan and try and get the tea towel off it without tearing it. Now this is why I floured it as heavily as I could. You don't want to be too rough with the bread. You want to be as gentle as possible because you want to try and keep all the air in there. This stuck to the tea towel, which is a right pain. Oh. Okay, I'm going to have to be brutal with it. Right, okay, that's not really ideal at all because the dough stuck to the tea towel, so I haven't got a nice top, but I'm sure it'll still be edible. So we'll put it back in the oven for, so it's on 250 and I'm setting the timer for 20 minutes, and then after 20 minutes I'll take it out, take the lid off, and then reduce the temperature by about 20 degrees to 220, 230, and then put it back for a further 20 minutes. Right, so the 20-minute buzzer has gone off, so I'm going to get the bread out of the oven. Oh, shit. And take the lid off, and as you can see, it's risen quite nicely already, but it's not very dark, and put it back without the lid on. Right. And at the same time, I'll turn the temperature down to 220. Okay, and give that another 20 minutes. Okay, the buzzer's going off. They've had the bread's had another 20 minutes in the oven. I'm going to get it out now. Okay, looks like that, and we can sort of roll it out. With bread, you normally tap the bottom. Sounds nice and hollow. And I'm just sort of propping that up on the side of the the board, so it can cool down slowly. So the top of it doesn't look neat, but it's the right sort of size. So we'll leave it until it cools down a bit, and then cut it in half, and you'll be able to see the inside. Okay, so the bread's cooled down. I'm just going to cut it in half. And that is what it looks like inside. So even though it was a bit of a nightmare getting it out of the tea towel and into the bowl, the crust is nice and crispy, and the inside looks absolutely perfect. I did a little bit of Googling after the tea towel didn't work very well, and what I learned was that it was probably better if we just used a bowl and lightly oiled it, rather than using the tea towel, or probably flouring the tea towel even more. I did do it once before and I didn't have such a problem getting it out of the bowl, but yeah, lightly greasing the bowl might be a better idea, and then just sprinkling it with flour before you put it into the oven. The other suggestion was to put a bit of baking parchment in the bowl, and then plopping the dough on top of that, and that's really good because that's non-stick. It would come out a lot easier than using the tea towel. So there you are. It freezes really well. Just let it completely cool down, put it in a plastic bag and chuck it in the freezer. And I'm not sure there's anything more I need to say. If you've got any questions, just message me and I'll help if I can.